Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Batra daf Kuf Nun Aleph. This is the daf for Shabbat. We're going to continue in trying to figure out what is considered nechasim. When someone says, "I'm giving you my possessions," what is included? So we finished yesterday by saying that shtar is called a document is called nechasim. Where do we get this from? So we started with a little bit of background. We had Rabbi Bar Yitzchak who said there's two different kinds of documents. So we went through what those are, and now we have a third one. Rav Chia bar Avin said in the name of Rav Huna, there's actually three. And he brings up, so the two that we said, and the idach is one of the following. In kadam mocher v'katavet ashtar. If the buyer decides to already write a document, I'm planning to sell you a house, and I say I'm going to write the document. So tasha shaninu, as we learned, that this is doable. Kotvin shtar lemocher alfa pishen lokach limo. We've learned this a bunch of times. I could decide to write a shtar, even though you're not there, because why? Well, if I was lending you money and I decided to write out a document that I'm lending you money and maybe I never go ahead with it, and then I can use this document against you and claim that you owe me money. That's bad for you. I can't do that unless you're there and you agree to it. But if I write a document that I sold you my house, and let's say it falls and gets lost and we never actually go through with the sale, and then you pick it up off the street, say, hey, I own this house. It's bad for me, but it's good for you. So if I decide I'm going to write this anyway, even though we haven't done a deal, it's only bad for me. And therefore, it's my risk if I decide I want to do it. Right? Why would I want to do it? Well, maybe I want to have everything ready so that when you're ready to buy it, we can go ahead with it quickly. The point is I could do it even if you're not there. Now, let's say we go and we make the sale and I leave the document at home and I don't give you the document. Once you do an act of acquiring the land, which we're going to see in a minute is the three ways you can acquire land, kesef, shtar, chazakah, either you give me money, or we do the document, which we didn't do in this case, or chazakah, like you started working the land as if you're the owner, and this is after we discussed it, I was selling it to you, and you acquire the land, yikneh shtar, wherever the document is, it could be in my house, it's already considered yours. It's already as if it's in your possession. What's this on the basis of? And here's going to be how we know shtar is called nechasim. Because it says here on this sugya, Zoe Shashaninu, and this is what we learned in the Mishnah in Kiddushin, Nechasim she'en lahem achrayut, niknim im nechasim sheyesh lahem achrayut. You can acquire, okay, well, let's talk about what's possessions that have no guarantee, which is movables. Those can be acquired together with possessions that have a guarantee. What's that? Land. Meaning, and then the kesef b'shtar b'chazakah, if you acquire land in those three ways, and while you're doing the acquiring of that, you had discussed also you were acquiring movables, you acquire those movables as soon as you do an act of kinyan on the land, you already acquire all the movables, even though they're not actually there, they're not in the property, they're not in your possession, doesn't matter, they're already considered yours. Main point here being, they use this Mishnah to prove that the shtar is acquired. Why is that? Because shtar is called nechasim, and that's how we know. That gets us to our answer. Second category for today, behema ikre nechse. Also animals. So if I promise you my possessions, that includes animals. Ditnan, as it says in the following Mishnah, hamakdish nechasav. If you consecrate all of your possessions, and there was an animal that could go on the altar. Now, usually when you consecrate an animal, since if it can go on the altar, meaning it's not blemished, it automatically is brought as a sacrifice. The problem is we're going to see this one little problem here, which is, okay, by the way, we already see here, you were makdish, you consecrated nechasim, and that includes your animals. Your animals are already consecrated. But what do we do with them? This is a side point. There's a Mishnah in Shkarim. Scharim olot, okay, scharim are sacrificed as burnt offerings because those go up completely to God. They get completely burned. Nobody benefits from them. So that's the easy one. The problem is you can't bring a korban olah from a female animal. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is that you've completely consecrated the animal, but part of it, the person's going to benefit from because korban shlamim is that the owner eats from it. So what do we do with the nekevot? You sell them for the purposes of acquiring shlamim, and that way you've already taken the whole amount and you've turned it into something useful for the temple, for sacrifices, and then from there you bring the korbanot shlamim. Ofot ikre nichse. Also birds are called possessions. How do we know this? Ditnan, same idea, and we're going to see this in a few categories. Hamakdish nechasav, vayu b'hem dvarim haruim legabei mizbeach. if there were things that you could use on the altar, like, for example, and here we're going to see included in the example of nechasim is birds, yenot, shmanim, ve'ofot, wine, there were wine libations, oil, there were oil libations, and also oil went into the mincha offerings, ve'ofot, and birds. Tefillin ikre nechse. Also tefillin, ditnan, as it says in the Mishnah. Hamakdish nechasav ma'alin lo tefillin. Even your tefillin get consecrated when you consecrate all of your possessions. It includes even your tefillin. So even tefillin is called nechasim. Ibayalahu. But now they ask the following question, which we won't have an answer to. Sefer Torah. Sefer Torah mai. What about a Sefer Torah? Now, why would it not be called your possessions? Well, kevan de lo mazdabin, you're not allowed to sell a Sefer Torah. Dasur l'zabune, because it's forbidden. So since it doesn't get sold, since it's forbidden to sell a Sefer Torah, so perhaps we won't call that your possessions. Possessions are things that you can sell. Lav nichsehu, and then we would say that's not called possessions. Odilma, or perhaps we say kevan de mizdabin l'mod Torah v'lisai isha nichsehu. There are certain circumstances, unique circumstances, and we learned this also in the past, in Masechet Megillah. You could sell a Torah if you want to learn Torah or to marry a woman. Therefore, maybe it's called, if you need it for your marriage, it's called nichasim. To which they answer, teku. We don't know. Okay, Sefer Torah is left open. Okay, now we're going to have a simam for 5 stories. The first 3 are going to involve a woman, like a mother, and the second 2 are going to involve sister. There's 5 stories that take place, 2 with sisters, 3 with mothers, all have to do with women, interesting. And let's see the stories. Okay, so the simanim are Zutra, Ime de Amram, Mitarte Achvata, 2 brothers, Rav Tuvi, and Rav Dimi, which should be Rav Dimi something Rav Yosef. It's not 2 people, it's not Vir Rav Yosef, it's Rav Dimi bar Rav Yosef or something like that. Ime de Marzutra, de Rav Zutra bar Tuvia. Okay, so the mother of Marzutra bar Tuvia, Katvino lenichse Rav Zutra bar Tuvia. She wrote all of her possessions to Rav Zutra, her son. Now, why did she do this? Okay, this is classic. Okay, classic anyway. This is what people do, all sorts of things to avoid issues in the future. Sometimes it's to get around tax issues. Sometimes it's other things. Well, she was getting married. She was getting married to Rav Zavid. And she said, I don't want my son to lose out on my possessions. I'm going to get married. My husband's going to inherit me. So what does she do? She writes all of her property to her son so that she can get married and not lose her money to Rav Zvid. Again, it wasn't really her that she was worried about. She was worried about her son, right? And therefore, well, sort of. She wanted to keep it within her family. And to avoid her property being taken over by Rav Zvid, she gave it to her son. Insiba Vigarsha. What happened though? She got married and then Rav Zvid divorced her. After the Kamedra of Bibi Bar Abaye. So she goes before Rav Bibi Bar Abaye. Now, I want you to remember Rav Bibi Bar Abaye before we read the story. Okay, if you recall, what happened with Rav Bibi Bar Abaye? So there was a story on Daf Kuf Lamed Zayin where there was a woman who was going into his property to get her fruits. She owned the tree and he was getting very upset with her. And finally she said, listen, I won't use the tree while you're alive. And then, meaning I will access it when you die. And then he gave it to his son. He had his son acquire it. And then Rabbi Bibi kind of got in trouble. People said that that's not appropriate what you did. That only would work if you gave it to somebody else, not to your own son. That doesn't work. So, because that was the kinyan payroot and kinyan aguf and all that. So remember that was Rabbi Bibi, because it's a very interesting story. There, Rabbi Bibi was trying to get away from, the possessions leaving his reshut. And here she's trying to prevent possessions from getting away from her domain. Okay, so she goes to Rabbi Bibi. Now, you would think, based on his story, that he would be sensitive to the situation. But in fact, he's not. And what does he say? Amar mishum de look, you gave him to your son because you were getting married. And look, you did in fact get married. So the fact that you got divorced is irrelevant. You did it under a certain condition, and that condition happened, and we're done. There's nothing to do. You lost your money. When the woman wanted to get it all back now she's a divorcee. She needs the money, right? She wrote it all to her son, but she didn't mean for it to be in her son's possession once, if she wasn't married. He says, it's too bad. You already gave it to him. There's nothing you can do. Amarle Rav Huna B'Reid Rav Yoshua. Now, the same response happens in this story. Okay, Rav Huna B'Reid Rav Yoshua is here. Actually, I forgot to check who does it there. Let's just check. It's on Kuf Lamed Zayin. Yeah, it's Rav Huna B'Reid Rav Yoshua. Okay? He says the exact same retort. He says, Okay, again, there were different interpretations, but let's just go with you come from the house of Eli and you say things that are cut off, like his family was cut off, and you don't know what you're talking about. Even if you say someone is trying to get the money away from someone else and therefore gives it to, right, in this case, she gave it to her son to get it away from her future husband. It works that it's final only if it wasn't clear why she was doing it. But here it was super clear that she was doing it just so she can get married and her husband wouldn't have access to it. And she did get married, but she also got divorced. And therefore, obviously, she gets her money back because that was her intent. She was only giving it to him as long as she was married. As soon as she's not married anymore, she gets it back. So again, Rav Bibi Bar Abaye is knocked off by Rav Huna Bar Rav Yoshua, who offends him, right, and said, what kind of a craziness is this? And it's interesting, I think it's kind of, there's this ironic thing going on, which is he tried to prevent stuff from, now, if you notice, there's another similarity. They both gave it to their sons, right? So it's interesting that it was okay for him to do it, or you could claim maybe he did it, saw it was wrong, and then, right, wanted to say, well, this woman's wrong also, but Rav Huna Bar Rav Yoshua saying it's not the same situation. It's not only interesting that Rav Bibi Bar Abaye is kind of in the same kind of situation and rules differently, but even Rav Huna Bar Rav Yoshua, right? He had no problem with the woman who was giving it to her son temporarily, using it to avoid the husband getting it and gets it back. That was okay. And he was on her side. But he wasn't okay with Rav Bibi Bar Abaye, who was trying to take this land away. Now, you have to remember, Bibi Bar Abaye was also doing it with land that wasn't even really his. It was land that she just gave him rights to. It was really her land, and he just made this woman's life miserable. And perhaps you could say that Rav Bibi maybe was a little less sensitive to the women, whereas Rav Huna Bar Rav Yoshua was more sensitive to these women and said, no, you can't just take things away from them, right? We have to support these women. Anyway, very interesting comparison. Ime de Rami Bar Chama. Be'orcha, okay, second story. The mother of Rami Bar Chama in the evening, Patvinu lenichse Rami Bar Chama. She wrote, she was sick on her deathbed. She says, I want to give all my property to Rami Bar Chama. But B'tzafra, in the morning, she changed her mind. Katvinu Rav Ukva Bar Chama. She decides to give it all to Rav Ukva Bar Chama. Remember, we said how the daughters of Rav Chisda were married to Rami Bar Chama and Rav Ukva Bar Chama. So here we have the two brothers again. And the mother basically wanted to switch and give to Rav Ukva. So she dies, and Ata Rami Bar Chama lekame to Rav Sheshet. Kind of funny thing happens. Rami Bar Chama goes to Rav Sheshet. Ukve b'nichsem. Rav Sheshet says, "You're the owner. She gave it to you first." Asa Rav Ukva Bar Chama came to Rav Nachman. He went to somebody else to get a second opinion. And Rav Nachman Ukma b'nichse. Each one who went to their rabbi told them, "It's yours." Now we're really stuck. Well, kind of funny thing happens. So instead of trying to figure out what to do, well, Rav Sheshet, who said it goes to Rami, went to Rav Nachman, who said it goes to Ukva. And after Rav Sheshet, the Kamei to Rav Nachman. Amalei, my time of Ukva Marley, Rav Ukva Rachama. On what basis did you give it to Rav Ukva Rachama? Imishum Dahadra, if you want to say she changed her mind, Bahashriva. She was, well, first of all, she's dead. But what he really seems to be saying is she was a Shriv Mera. Now, a Shriv Mera, what do we learn? Right? That when a Shriv Mera speaks, whatever they say is as if there was a kinyan done. So it was a done deal already with Rami Bar Chama, which means it was already acquired by Rami Bar Chama when she promised him. She can't just change her mind about it. Well, Amar Le, Rav Nachman says to him, and we've seen this over and over in our Masechet, that Rav Nachman goes like Shmuel, and he quotes Shmuel, Hachi Amar Shmuel. Koshi ilu amad choser b'matzanato. If the case was, now this woman promised Rami Bar Chama. Now you want to claim Rav Sheshet that it was already acquired by him at the time, but we know the way a Shchiv Meirah works. How does it work? If a Shchiv Meirah is dying and promises all their possessions and then gets better, what happens? They can change their mind. So that's what it means here. Ilu amad choser. If she had gotten better, she would have been able to renege on what she promised to Rami Bar Chama. So it means it wasn't really his at the time. And therefore, choser b'matzanato. Also, if she promises a gift to someone, the fact that potentially, now she didn't get up, she wasn't better. But since she could have gotten better, theoretically, so therefore, she can actually change her mind about who she wants to give it to while she's still alive. And therefore, she chose Ukva Bar Chama after he gets it. Well, the Gemara says, or perhaps Rav Sheshet says back to Rav Nachman, Imar Damar Shmuel La'atzma, La'acher Miyama. So it seems like it's Rav Sheshet. Rav Sheshet says, what Shmuel said was, no, that means if someone wants to return it to themselves, meaning if you get better, it can revert back to you. But it didn't mean that you could write it to somebody else and change your mind about who you want to give it to. That's what Shmuel was saying. To which Rav Nachman responds, says, yes, it is. Amar lei, beferish Amar Shmuel, bein la'atzmo, bein la'acher. No, Shmuel said, if there's potential you could get better, then you could actually change your mind, both about reverting it back to yourself and about giving it to somebody else. And that's why Rav Nachman held that Ukva is the one who gets it and not Rami. Third story, Ime de Rav Amram Chasida. So now we get to the mother of Rav Amram Chasida, the third mother story. He had a bundle of documents like IOUs, which are worth a lot of money. But when she was dying, she had. When she was dying, she said, I want to give all of this bundle of documents to my son Amram. Now, the brother comes before Rav Nachman. Amrule, or the brothers come before Rav Nachman. Amrule v'halo mashach. So they say to him, look, she promised him the bundle of documents, but he never pulled it. He never did any sort of act of acquiring it. Amar lahu, he says to them, okay, you ready for the big line? Now, why is this such a big line? We've said this a million times. Well, you'll be surprised to know this is the first time the Gemara uses this line. And in fact, it's only mentioned one other time in our Masechet, on Daf Kuf Ayin Hey. We haven't gotten there yet. Now, we've quoted this a million times because the commentaries say this. But in the Gemara, it's actually mentioned very few times explicitly. Okay, one can try to look into that, why that is. I'm just stating it as a fact. Says, no, there was no need for a kinyan. She said on her deathbed, she was giving this to Amram, and therefore it's his. Her word alone is as if it's acquired. Okay, fourth story. So the sister of Tovi bar Matna writes all of her possessions to Tovi bar Matna. Bitsafra, in the morning. Lepanya, in the afternoon, though, and she also is on her deathbed. Ata Rav Achtavoy bar Rav Matna bechala. So the other brother, Rav Achtavoy, comes and starts crying to her. Okay, the Koran has a footnote. I didn't look this up myself, but the Koran says that Rav Achtavoy is barely mentioned in the Gemara, which might make sense in light of this story. This is his only mention. Now, he starts crying and he says to her the following, Amarla, if everybody sees what you're doing and that you gave all your possessions to Rav Tovi, who is more of a Talmid Chacham than me, Hashta Amrei Mart Sorva Merabanan, my love Sorva Merabanan. It will be a huge humiliation for me. They'll say, look, she gave all the possessions to Rav Tovi because he's a great Talmid Chacham, and the brother, slacker, he doesn't know anything. And that's what they're going to say about me. And according to the footnote in the Koran, he had reason to believe that because he really wasn't, as knowledgeable. So she felt bad for him. And she didn't want him to be, kind of thrown to the wayside by people looking and seeing what she did. And therefore, surprisingly, Katvinu Niale, she writes all of her possessions to him, and Rav Tovi ends up losing out. It's very interesting, right? This is to prevent humiliation in the future. Onto the Kamedah Rav Nachman. So let's see what happens. Was that valid what she did? Can she undo it or not? So they come before Rav Nachman, each one claiming rights to the property after the sister died. What did we say? Same things before, which Shmuel said, right? And of course, Rav Nachman's the one who said this. Since she could have changed her mind and canceled the gift entirely, therefore she can change who she gives it to. In other words, again, if she were to have gotten better, the whole thing would have been canceled. So therefore, even though she didn't, she could change her mind about who she gives it to. Achte, last story. Achte de Rav Dimi bar Yosef. That's what it is, Rav Dimi bar Yosef. That's what we said before in the beginning. With the siman of to remember these stories, it's Rav Dimi bar Yosef, the son of Yosef. Havale piskita de pardesa. He had a section of an orchard that was his. Kol emata v'chalsha. It's you call this woman a bit of a hypochondriac. Every time she got sick, she thought she was going to die. So she would every time say, oh, I'm giving this to you, my brother. Okay, I'm giving you this orchard. Okay, I think I said it wrong. She had the orchard. The sister of Rav Dimi had this piece of orchard. Every time she got sick, she thought she was going to die. She said, oh, brother, take it. V'chi kaima have a hadraba. Now, every time she got better, she changed her mind. So I didn't really mean to give it to you. I was just giving it to you because I thought I was dying, but it didn't die, so I want it back. And this again is fair. We can do this. Zimnechada chalsha. But one time, okay, we're now at the top of bet. One time she got sick again. Shal chale takne. She said to him something different. She said, come and do an act of acquiring, which is going to make this effective even if I don't die. Well, not exactly though, but we'll see. But what she was trying to say is, I want this to be final. I want you really to acquire this. I'm not going to go back and change my mind. Now, why did she say this? Because she was convinced that she was dying. Okay, she was this time more convinced than every other time. You can see where the story is going to go. Well, shlach. So, okay, now what happened was one second, shalach lo be'ina. Right. So he sends back lo be'ina. I don't want, like, I've had enough of this. No thanks. I'm not coming. I'm not going to do a kinyan on this. Shachale takne kol hecha debayit. She said, listen, don't come, just acquire it wherever you are. Okay, you don't want to come to me, fine. But you got to acquire this, okay? It's really important to me. My dying wish. Please do it for me. Okay, Azal, he went. And in order to really make it final, what did he do? And we're going to get to this whole sugya soon. Shaire uknu minei. And that's what we saw in the Mishnah already on Daf Kuf Mevav, if you remember. That if you don't, if Shchim doesn't write all of their possessions, then it's a done deal, especially if you do a kinyan. So if she did, we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but number one, there was a kinyan, right? She said kinay, and he left over some, so that it was like a gift in her lifetime. That even if she's going to get better, we don't renege on a kind of gift like this, because both it wasn't everything, and it was a kinyan. So the combination should make this final. However, kikaima, well, it turns out, shocking, she doesn't die. Hadraba, and she changes her mind again and says, I want this orchard back. To the Kameda Rav Nachman. So they go before Rav Nachman. Shalach le ta. So Rav Nachman says, come to her brother. Again, who was it? It was Rav Dimi Bar Yosef. He says, Rav Dimi Bar Yosef, come to my court. Lo ata. Dimi Bar Yosef doesn't come. You can see he's a little frustrated by the situation. And he says, Amal, my ete, why should I come? I did everything I needed to do to make this final, even if she gets better. I left some over. It was still hers. So I didn't buy the whole thing. So it's not like she gave me everything of hers, which would then mean, obviously, she was only doing it if she was going to die, but that she didn't do that. And numiyade, and I did a kinyan, so it's mine. I don't need to come to your court. Shalach le, well, Rav Nachman didn't like this. He says back to him, Ilo atit, machina lach besilva de lo mabadam. If you don't come, I'm gonna hit you with a thorn that's not going to take out any blood. What does that mean? Thorn that doesn't take out blood means I'm not going to harm you physically. I'm going to put you and excommunicate you. Okay, I'm going to make your life miserable, even though there won't be any blood coming out. Amar lehu l'sadeh. So now Rav Nachman starts investigating, and he goes to the witnesses who saw what she told him and said, "Hepi hava maseh. What exactly happened?" Amruleh, they said to him, Amrahachi. She said the following: Vai dekamai tahach itita. She was saying, "Oh, woe is to me. This woman, meaning herself, is going to die." She was, clearly on her deathbed and thought she was going to die again. She clearly wasn't on her deathbed, but she was certain she was dying. Amar lehu, Rav Nachman says, well, in that case, im ken hava mitzava machmat mita, umitzava machmat mita choseo. Well, even though, and we're going to see this in the next sugya, even though one gives a gift of not all the possessions and does a kinyan, which we say is final, even if the person gets better, not if it's entirely clear that they did it because they thought they were dying. In that case, where it's clear, this command that she gave to him was clearly because she was convinced that she was dying, in that case, it goes back. And therefore, even though Rav Dimi Bar Yosef did everything he could to prevent this from being returned to her, actually Rav Nachman rules against him and he had to return it. Okay, that's going to be the lead into the next sugya, which is Itmar. So now we're going to see there's a debate about this matav shchimera b'miktzad. Okay, if you give a gift on your deathbed, but not of all your possessions. Amor Rabbanan Kamei de Rava Mishmei de Marzutra Berei de Rav Nachman de Amar Mishmei de Rav Nachman. So the rabbi said this in front of Rava in the name of Marzutra, who was the son of Rav Nachman, who was quoting his father Rav Nachman, and he said the following: Harehi kematnat bari, v'harehi kematnat shchimera. Well, a matnat shchimera b'miktzad, someone on their deathbed who gives part of their possessions away, is considered partially like a matnat shchimera, like a person on their deathbed, and partly like someone who's healthy. How so? Well, harehi kematnat bari she'im amad eno chozer. How is it like a matnat bari? This is what we explained. It's like a healthy person because if you change your mind, it doesn't go back. Okay? It's a done deal. And it's like a matnat shchimera that you could just say it and it's a done deal. You don't actually need to do an act of acquiring. It's a little different because we said before you do. And in fact, after the rabbis brought this in front of Rava in the name of Rav Nachman, Rava says, you guys have it all wrong. And he says it in the following way. Amar lehu Rava lava mina lehu. Have I not told you before? Lo title buki slike b'Rav Nachman. Don't hang empty jugs on Rav Nachman, which really means don't hang empty statements and claim that Rav Nachman said them. Don't attribute things to Rav Nachman that he didn't actually say. Because Hachi Amar Rav Nachman, this is what Rav Nachman said. You got it all wrong. A matnat shchimera b'miktzad, you give away part of your possessions when you're on your deathbed. Harehi kematnat bari ubaya kinyan. It's like a matnat bari that you need to do a kinyan. If you don't do a kinyan, it's not effective at all. Even if you're to die, the person doesn't get it. Because it's not like a shchimera that all you have to do is say it and it's as if it's ktuvim u'mechimisulim as we saw in today's stuff. No. It's like a matnat bari. It's like anyone somebody gives. If you don't do an act of kinyan, it's not effective. So if you say I'm giving you something as a gift, if I say I'm giving you something as a gift, and then before I actually give it to you, I die, it's not relevant. Okay? Unless it's all my possessions. It's all my possessions, I don't need a kinyan. If it's part of my possessions, I need a kinyan. And again, everyone agrees that it's like a matnat shchimera that it's like a matnat bari she'im amad eno chozer. But if I did the kinyan and then I get better, it's too late. It's a done deal. Okay, I already gave it to you, so I can't renege on that. Other than, if you remember, what Rav Nachman eventually said, though, unless it was 100% clear you did it because you thought you were dying, then we're going to have an exception to the rule. But right now, the general practice is even if you think you're dying, but it's not so clear that that's why you gave the gift because you're dying. Again, the idea is very simple. If I give away all my possessions, it's clear I'm doing it because I think I'm dying. If I don't give away all my possessions and I just give a gift, that could be like anybody who gives a gift. So what if I'm on my deathbed or not? And then, according to the second reading of Rav Nachman, Rava's version of Rav Nachman, it's only if I did a kinyan. If I didn't do a kinyan, it's nothing. I didn't do an act of acquiring, so how could it be even relevant? So now, Eitive Rava le Rav Nachman. Even though Rava says this is what Rav Nachman said, Rava himself brings a difficulty on Rav Nachman. We're going to actually have 3 difficulties on Rav Nachman, and we're going to answer them all. First one is Rava's. Now, from where are we going to bring a difficulty? From our Mishnah. What did our Mishnah say? Now, he's going to deal with this issue, and all of them really. Rav Nachman said it's not going to be valid unless you did a kinyan. So comes Rav and he says, look at our Mishnah. Didn't say anything about a kinyan. What did our Mishnah say? Shiur karka kolshehu. If you leave over, right, this is on Daf Kuf Mem Vav. If you leave over any amount of land, matnato kayemet. So we have someone on their deathbed who gives away some of their possessions, but not everything. Even if they leave just a little bit to themselves, well, the matana is valid, even if they get better. My lav de lo kanu miyade. It sounds like you don't have to do a kinyan. It didn't say there was kinyan in there. To which the Gemara answers, lo de kanu miyade. Who says? Obviously, it must be where you did a kinyan, and then it fits with Rav Nachman. But the Gemara is not so happy with that answer because they say, Hachi, I'm a look at the rest of the Mishnah. It says, lo shiur karka kolshu ematanato kayemet. Right? If you don't leave over any land, you give it all away and then you get better. Well, the matana is not valid because you only did it because you thought you were dying. Now, idikanu miyade amai ematanato kayemet. Now, if I was on my deathbed and I gave you all my possessions and I did a kinyan, what? We're going to say it's not valid? Why did I do a kinyan if not to show? Usually, I'm on my deathbed. All I have to do is just say the words. It's yours. And it'll be yours if I die. But if I did a kinyan, why would I have done a kinyan if not to say, I really want to give this to you right now, irrelevant of whether I die or not? So if we're going to say it's with the kinyan, then it doesn't make any sense that the matana goes back. So Amarle Hachi Amar Shmuel. So now he says, no, this is what Shmuel said. Shchimera, this is the response. Shchimera shekatav kol nechasav la'achirim. If a shchimera, a person on their deathbed, writes all of their property to others, then af al pi shekanu miyado, even if they did a kinyan. Now, kinyan doesn't matter. Even if they did a kinyan, this answers our question. Even if they did a kinyan, Amar Choseo, if he got better or she got better, goes back to them. Biyadua shelo. Okay, so now we're back to saying, okay, where does this leave us? This basically says the Mishnah could be talking about a case where kanu miyado, and if it's kanu miyado, it shows that you need to have a kinyan. So now they're going to say, but wait, biyadua shelo haya. Sorry, amad choser. Sorry, I said that wrong. Amad choser, I read that wrong. Okay, alpha b'shkanu miyado. Okay, let's just go back to Shmuel. I'm sorry, I didn't read this well. Amar Shmuel, if you wrote all your possessions to others, even though kanu miyado, even though you did a kinyan, amad choser, why is that? That was just explaining. Sorry, I thought this was a new thing. No, that's just explaining the answer, which is back to Rav Nachman could explain that Mishnah. You really do have to do a kinyan in a matnat shchimera b'miktzat, a partial one. And even if you did a kinyan in a regular, when you gave away all of your possessions, you can still change your mind about it because it was clear you only did it because you thought you were going to die. So what we're establishing here is in a standard case where it wasn't clear you gave away your possessions because you were dying, you were on your deathbed. Now, we're going to say like this. What you gave away is going to affect whether we assume you did it because you were dying or not. If you give away everything, we assume you were dying, because why else would you give away everything? If you kept some for yourself, it must not have been because you thought you were dying, because if you had kept some for yourself, it must be because you thought you were going to stay alive. Unless, like the woman's case, where we said it was clear she thought she was dying, and that's why she gave it away, even though in the end she didn't give him everything. So within the second case of not giving everything away, there's two possibilities depending on the scenario. If it's clear you were giving away because you thought you were dying, then yes. But the standard is we don't assume that because, again, you didn't give everything away. So in the end, we don't really have a problem with our Mishnah with the fact that Rav Nachman said the only way this partial gift is going to actually be effective at all is forget about, not changing your mind about it. It's not even effective unless you did a kinyan, because that maslul, that track needs a kinyan. Even though the other track not only doesn't need a kinyan, because it's kitum v'chumasurim, even if you did a kinyan, it's not even effective if you don't even die, right? If you don't die, the kinyan doesn't mean anything. You get your lamb back, okay? Whereas, again, the gift that's partial is completely a gift as long as you did a kinyan, and it can't go back even if you got better, okay? Now, moving on to the second question. Rav Masharshi brings a question to Rava. Now, Rava had quoted Rav Nachman, so it's not right. Rava now raised a difficulty against Rav Nachman. We answered it, but we're back to that Rava quoted Rav Nachman. So again, we're going to have a problem on this need for a kinyan for it to be effective if you're giving away only some of your money on your deathbed. So he says the following. I lost my place for a second. Okay. There was a mother of these peddlers that was sick, like the sons of the peddler that were sick or something like that. She said, I want to give my beautiful jewelry, this necklace or some sort of jewel, to my daughter. Okay, it was 1,200. It was 12 zuzim, which is 1,200 zuzim. Okay, it was very expensive. Okay, 1,200. V'meita, and then she died. V'kimu dvareha. Okay, now she gave a gift, and they said it's valid. The gift goes through. The daughter gets it. Now the heirs wanted it, the sons, but now it was promised to the daughter. So now what do you see? There was no kinyan there. So why was it valid? It wasn't all her possessions. So why would it be valid? To which they end, that seems to go against Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman says it's only going to be valid if there's a kinyan. To which they answered, that was a case where she said, because I'm going to die, I want to give this to you. If she said it because I'm going to die, then you don't need a kinyan because then it goes into the category of a regular matnat shchimera. And again, that's an exception to the rule. You don't need a kinyan, right? And it's an exception in both things. Number one, you don't need a kinyan. And number two, it can go back if you end up surviving. In this case, she died, so that wasn't the issue. The issue was, is it actually acquired by the daughter, or can the son say, what are you talking about? We inherited. And obviously they wanted it. It was worth a lot of money. Third question, and the last one before we get to the halacha. The Gemara here will tell us the halacha. Eitive Ravina l'Rava. Ravina brings the following sources of difficulty. Again, against that, you need a kinyan. Someone says, give this get to my wife, or give this emancipation document to my slave, and then dies before they gave it. You can't give a get after death. You can't give an emancipation document after death. But if you say, give 100 zuzim to so-and-so, and then the person died, they will give this after death. Now, this doesn't sound like you did a kinyan, so why would it work? This is just giving some of your possessions to someone. It's a gift. You didn't do a kinyan. Looks like it goes against Rav Nachman. To which the Gemara says, well, how do we know there was no kinyan? To basically prove why this is a difficulty. Dumia de get, because it's right next to get. Ma get lav bar kinyan. Now, you never do a kinyan with a get. You pass it to her, but it's not called a kinyan. So, af hainami de lo kanu miyade. Right? So, since you can't do a kinyan with a get, you also didn't do a kinyan here. In other words, we're assuming the cases are parallel. Ha tamnami. So how do they answer this? The same way we answered the previous, although we'll have two different ways to answer this. The first is b'mitzaveh machmat mita. Again, it must be where he said, give this money to so-and-so because I'm about to die. And second option, Rav Huna b'rei Rav Yoshua amal, mitzaveh machmat mita ba'alma b'aya kinyan. Okay, now, generally, even mitzaveh machmat mita, you could say, he's not saying yes, but theoretically you could say, even if you're doing it because you're going to die, since you're not giving away everything, maybe you really do have to do a kinyan to make it effective. But maybe here the person said, I want you to give 100 to this person, and another 100 to this one, another 100 to this one, and they gave out all their property at that moment. Now, it doesn't mean you have to give all your property to one person for it to be considered kotev kol nechasav. You have to just give out, if you divided up all your property, and within that you said, give 100 to this person, and it didn't yet go to them, it would be effective because this is just a classic mana chimera. And it wouldn't even be a mana b'miktzad. And then, of course, it's not a question on Rav Nachman. So we had three difficulties on Rav Nachman, and then we resolved them all. This is the third one with two different types of answers. But the whole idea here is, right, and I'll just keep reading. I forgot to read the last few words there. It was a clear case of a matnat chimera and not a matnat chimera b'miktzad, because the person really did give away all their possessions. Okay, so Rav Nachman basically says, and this is the key thing, that a matnat chimera, that you give part of your property, in order for it to be an effective gift in the event that you do die, you have to do a kinyan. And when you do that kinyan, though, right, because you did the kinyan and because it wasn't the classic matnat chimera, if you actually get better, it's too late. The gift is a gift, unless, according to some at least, mitzaveh machmat mitaf. It was clear you said, I'm giving you this gift, like this jewel, because I'm dying, and then you get better, well, then we'll let you undo it. But we just saw right now that maybe that's not even true according to everybody. Now we're going to get to the halacha, the hilchata. The halacha is like this. Matnat chimera b'miktzah b'aya kinyan. Like Rav Nachman, you need to do a kinyan for it to be effective. V'af agav demeit. And even if you eventually die, right, or even if you die from that moment, right, if you didn't do a kinyan, it doesn't go to that person. Mitzaveh machmat mita lo b'aya kinyan. Okay, now, without a kinyan, right, so again, what we just said was, even if you died, if you didn't do a kinyan, it's not going to be effective. What if you said, I'm giving this because I'm going to die? Then you don't need a kinyan. That's an exception to the rule. We hold, not like the last suggestion we just had, but really, it's as if it's a regular matnat chimera. Vihu demeit. But that's if you died. Again, this is all because if you don't need a kinyan there, but that's because you're going to die. Amad choser afagav dekanu miyade. Right? But even if you did do a kinyan and then you got better, if it was mitzaveh machmat mita, you can actually take the gift back. And that's really the way we saw it, Rav Nachman explain. That's it for today's daf. Okay, that was a good place to end. We're now going to just do a quick review. We started with defining what is nechassim, right? We finished the list. We had shtar, animals, right, documents, animals, birds, tefillin, and we had a question about a Sefer Torah. And then we got to these 5 stories, all had to do with different properties that were promised. From there, we got to this issue of gifts that were giving, someone was giving away on their deathbed part of their property. And then we had a whole dealing with Rav Nachman's opinion. Some people misquoted him. Rava said, you got it all wrong. And the buke struke, and right, the buke, did I say that right? Buke struke, right? Buke strike. And you got Rav Nachman all wrong. And really, Rav Nachman said, again, the main thing being that if you give away part of your property, you have to do a kinyan, and you can't change your mind about it even if you get better, unless we saw it was clear that you did it because you thought you were dying. That's it for today. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Tov, and B'sorot Tovot.